Animals. Not only are these fun-loving companions a staple in houses across the world, but they have also been utilized in war farther back than anyone can remember. Gandhi once said the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated, and this rings true for war as well. Practically since the beginning of recorded history, animals have always been in the picture. Once man finally became agricultural and began to construct the basis of modern civilization, animals assisted him. Many times these animal soldiers go unrecognized as they are regarded as disposable. No tears were shed for the lost pigeons during the World Wars, and similarly today, dogs in the Middle East are hardly given the recognition they deserve. The animals that serve blindly until their deaths are often overlooked and not accounted for in the end. They have been forced to serve by their masters, and millions have been killed by it. And through this presentation, I hope to shed light on not only the usefulness of animals in war, but also specific animals that have played key roles in battles throughout history. Lucretius mentions battling alongside horses and elephants in his book, De Rerum Natura, and in this he also mentions the failed and disastrous attempts with bulls, boars, and lions. Lucretius, a Roman poet who lived in the years 99 through 55 BC, proves that animals have fought with their masters basically since war was created. The power of the elephant was harnessed by the ancient Carthaginians as well as the Romans, and its immense power and stature was enough to intimidate and strike fear in most opponents. Although they weren't very ferocious, the elephants were able to carry spearmen on its back, who were able to, in turn, kill the enemy from a safer location than the ground. Hannibal, a Carthaginian general, had a personal elephant who had light armor and a deep red cloth draped over it. One of the most useful animals, the pigeon, also was not intended for its use in war. Pigeons were raised by humans in captivity and bred to fly longer and longer distances for country-wide races. Their ability was not recognized in war until people figured out that they were perfect for carrying messages, and thus the carrier pigeon was born. When people imagine an animal alongside a soldier, what animal do they think of? The most popular response would be a dog, and for good reason. The dog, man's best friend, has been fighting and helping in wars since their domestication. Among the Greeks and Romans, dogs served most often as sentries and patrols, though they were sometimes taken into battle. Attila the Hun used war dogs in his campaigns across Eurasia, and the Spanish conquistadors used armored dogs that had been trained to kill natives. Dogs have deep roots in battle, and previously many had been bred specifically for battle. This is not the case for Stubby, a combat-ready dog in World War I. Sergeant Stubby was the most decorated war dog of World War I, and the only dog to be promoted to sergeant through combat. The Boston Bull Terrier started out as the mascot of the 102nd Infantry 26th Yankee Division, and ended up becoming a full-fledged combat dog. Brought up to the front lines, he was injured in a gas attack early on, which gave him a sensitivity to gas that later allowed him to warn his soldiers of incoming gas attacks by running and barking. He helped find wounded soldiers and even captured a German spy who was trying to map Allied trenches. Stubby was the first dog to be ever given rank in the United States Armed Forces, and was highly decorated for his participation in 17 engagements and also being wounded twice. Stubby was actually promoted to the rank of sergeant, outclassing even some human soldiers. Dogs were not only important physically, but also mentally. They help soldiers cope with the stress and fatigue of war, similarly to how dogs are used in hospitals and nursing homes to raise morale and comfort the patients. This was especially true during the trench warfare of World War I. Here morale was at an all-time low, and with the help of dogs like this guy here, soldiers were given the comfort they desperately needed. Dogs today are mainly used for their sense of smell, and the same was true in the past. Their keen sense of smell was able to locate and avoid enemy snipers, ambushes, weapon caches, and even soldiers hidden underwater with only a small reed visible for breathing. In more modern times, these dogs are able to assist with the detection of bombs and traps scattered throughout the Middle East.
as a Polish sausage, so it's got good taste.
One of the most interesting and unusual uses of domesticated animals in history was the use of war elephants, which probably began around 4000 BC in the Indus River Valley. Later, the largest land mammals in the animal kingdom were used in many battles, including against Alexander the Great's forces by Hannibal's Carthaginian army against the Romans, and by the Sultans of India when fighting the Mongols. Dating back to Hannibal's crossing of the Alps, elephants enjoyed a small role in war. Units of elephants, called elephantry, were used to mount large-scale charges at the enemy, with hopes of scattering and causing mass confusion in the process. This was used heavily by the Romans after seeing the Persians use these tactics, but the elephant was not always reliable. They would often stampede into their own troops after being scared. This would in turn spook other elephants into trampling over anyone who was in their way. Because of this, elephant riders were given a spike and a hammer so they could quickly end the elephant in seconds before they would stampede. The elephant wasn't only utilized for its intimidation factor, and as gunpowder became a factor, its use in actual battle declined greatly. But this didn't stop it from pulling heavy equipment and moving debris for the Germans after battles in Western Europe. The elephant's sheer power is more than enough for some heavy lifting, and it commonly found itself moving rubble aside for tanks. The Indian elephant, perhaps the most sought-after pachyderm, was well known by the Germans and the Indians alike. Because the elephant became less and less useful in combat as time passed, he was used more and more as a beast of burden. An article in the St. Louis Times dated 1879 stated, "His power is enormous, and to this power he adds intelligence. He will lift the largest teak logs, and teak is among the heaviest of woods, and arrange them in piles. He will push a log with his foot against the saw and carry the sawed wood in his tucks or in his trunk. In all these maneuvers he is directed by the mahout, who sits on his neck and manages him with a goad, or more generally by word of mouth. Sometimes an elephant is so wild and untamable as to be dangerous, and yet he will serve his masters. We saw one animal who was pushing logs about who had killed 4 or 5 of the workmen already. He was kept in order by a lad who had carried a sharp spear, keeping the spear always near the elephant's eye." Although the use of elephants has practically ceased with modern times, its rich past still reminds us of the power this great beast has to offer. Of any animal used in war, none compares to the usefulness and success of the pigeon. This bird can be easily credited for saving thousands of lives during the World Wars alone. The carrier pigeon, originally evolved from the wild rock dove, has been harnessed for its speed and physique by humans for hundreds of years. Even before they were used for warfare, they were used for long-distance races. These carrier pigeons often carried messages that were too dangerous for humans to attempt, and they were constantly under fire from enemies. This was because the carrier pigeon was no secret. Everyone knew exactly what a bird flying over a battlefield was doing, and subsequently many more were shot down than those who safely delivered the messages. In fact, the survival rate for these feathered fighters was only 10% during battle. Pigeons, it seems, also regarded honor in the same way humans do. One pigeon, ironically named G.I. Joe, helped save the lives of 100 soldiers who were in danger of being bombed by their own planes. After G.I. Joe took off, he flew 20 miles in 20 minutes and arrived just in time. For this action, he was awarded the PDSA Dickinson Medal. The PDSA Dickinson Medal is specifically given to those in the animal kingdom who perform remarkable duties in desperate times. In total, 64 medals have been given out, half going to carrier pigeons from 1943 to 1949. Perhaps even a greater award was given out to a bird by the name of cher ami, meaning dear friend in French. Cher ami was given a mission to fly 25 miles to relay a message to control. 500 men over 9 companies in the 77th Division had their lives on the line, and it was all up to this bird. The 77th was trapped down under their own artillery, losing men to their own bombs by the minute. The last 2 birds had been shot down immediately, and if the artillerymen was not informed of their problems, they would likely all die. Cher ami took flight, and 60 minutes later he arrived, only he hardly looked like a bird anymore. He had been shot and blinded, blood covering his entire body, and one of his legs was only hanging on by a tendon, but he didn't stop flying. After saving the men, he was nursed back to health, even given a wooden leg to replace his blown-off one. Cher ami was honored by being given a place in the Smithsonian where you can go and see him today. Other flying soldiers include bees, which have been used since the Romans as a form of attack. They would dismantle beehives from their locations and proceed to catapult them into oncoming enemies. Beehive traps were also set during World War I, and in them a tripwire would release a swarm of angry bees. Chickens, too, have found their place on the battlefield, believe it or not. In 2003, the U.S. military planned to attach caged chickens to the top of their Humvees as they entered Iraq, to act as an early warning system to any dangerous chemicals or nerve agents. Just like the canary down the mine, if the soldiers saw the chicken keel over, they would know to don their gas masks. Dubbed Operation Kawadi Field Chicken, or known as KFC, it never actually got off the ground after 41 of the 43 chickens died within a week of the arrival in Kuwait. The camel, like his cousin the horse, was mainly used as a form of transportation. They were useful for navigating arid terrain where water was not readily available because they could go weeks without drinking water. At one point in time, the Americans actually had an official military camel corps during the mid-19th century. They were useful for fighting the Mexicans and the natives in the Southwest, but this was short-lived, as the corps was disbanded at the start of the Civil War. A record from 1398 portrays another use of the camels. During his invasion of India in 1398, the Turkish ruler Timur loaded his camels with as much hay and wood as possible and set them on fire, sending them screaming into the ranks of the opposing 120 war elephants. The elephants panicked and stormed back towards their own lines, creating carnage and allowing Timur to seize the advantage. Camels, although not elusive like the pigeon or intimidating like the elephant, still have found one more use on the battlefield. Recently, troops deployed in Afghanistan are on the lookout for kamikaze camels, who, strapped with explosives, charge full speed at enemies. This was a tactic that actually saw use during the 1980s in the Afghani Mujahideen's battle against the Soviets. Animals like this, specifically the pigeons, elephants, and dogs, and to a lesser extent the camels, should be remembered for their valiant efforts in helping mankind. Such devotion has been key to saving countless lives in the history of war.